you ever seen one of those giant inflatable, I don't know if they're made out of vinyl or plastic, those big like bags that sit on a lake, and then you've seen those videos of like someone jumping off of a platform and landing on the giant bag while someone's sitting on it, and it catapults them into the air. You've seen some of those? I've never been on one of those, but keep that in the back of your mind. One time when I was little, about 12 years old, my family went camping at Spring Mill State Park in Indiana. And my stepdad brought along this gigantic inflatable piece of like packing material. It was like a big inflatable bag, like the size of a couch. And so we were all going camping that weekend, and I think he was just packing a trailer at work, a semi-truck trailer, found this thing. They were just going to throw it away. So he thought, hey, somebody could sit on this or use it like a cot or something at night. We're going camping. So he threw it in the van. And then we took this thing, and it was the coveted place to sit down, right? It was like it functioned like a giant beanbag that my siblings and I all wanted to lounge on while we were camping. And of course, they were hogging it the whole time. I didn't get an opportunity to even get on it until the next morning when everybody was still asleep. And there it was, laying next to the fire and picnic table. And I went over and I laid down on this thing, and it was so cozy and it was so quiet, and I felt so safe and so secure laying on this giant inflatable bag. And unbeknownst to me, after I fell back asleep on this giant bag, my two older siblings have climbed up on top of the picnic table, and they see me asleep there and pounce off of the picnic table onto the inflatable bag, sending me flying into the air. And I remember it so vividly because I woke up out of REM sleep in the air. It was a very unique feeling that, fortunately, I've never experienced since. But I remember opening my eyes in midair. I don't know how high they got me, but I do remember distinctly looking down and seeing the roof of the van that we drove there in when I woke up in the air. And fortunately for me, the picnic table did break my fall on the way back down. And I've never seen my two older brothers laugh so hard in their life. They just cried, and no one was concerned if I was okay or not. But it was the epitome of a rude awakening. I thought I was safe. I was so certain I was safe and secure, and boy, was I wrong. Welcome to Romans chapter 2. Verses 17 through 29 is where we're picking up. And Paul is attempting to wake up the religious Jew in much the same way. Remember, the subject still has not changed in Romans chapter 2. Paul's teaching about the impending wrath and judgment of God. Everyone is going to have to stand before God and give an account for their lives. Everyone who ever was. Where will you hide when the wrath and judgment of God come to collect in your life? Well, the pagan might try to say something like this: I'll just hide in the fact that I didn't know. I didn't know God, and I didn't have the law. What does Paul say back to them in chapters 1 and 2? Paul says, nope. God is clearly perceived in creation. Pagans have no excuse. The law is written on your hearts. We know that because you're a moral human being. No one is exempt. You have no excuse. Nice try. You still have to face the wrath and judgment of God. And then maybe the moral person would say, hey, well, I've done pretty well, relatively well, fairly well, morally, compared to everything else going on in this crazy world. And Paul would say to them what in chapters 1 and 2? Nope, you're not moral enough. You can't hide in that either. And now here in 17 through 29, Paul is turning to the religious Jew who still thinks they have a refuge to hide in. They still think that they have this shield from the wrath and judgment of God that the rest of the world doesn't have. They think that they have this like unshakable net of safety that is their Jewness, if that's a word. I'm making it a word for the sake of this sermon. But the Jew would say this: I'm good. I'm safe. I'm a descendant of Abraham himself, Paul. I have the law. I've been circumcised. I am the covenant people of God. I am completely secure. That's what they think. That's what they believe. And that's why they feel safe in light of Paul's argument. And unbeknownst to them, Paul has already jumped off the picnic table. He's in the air. And he's coming down on the inflatable mattress, and they are about to go flying into the air because they are not safe at all from Paul's argument. The religious Jew he's confronting, by the time Paul's done with them, they're going to understand their Jewishness doesn't save them, their possession of the law doesn't save them, their circumcision doesn't save them. Why? Well, because, again, Paul's argument, it's still laser focused from verse 11. God shows no partiality. When it comes to the wrath and judgment of God, God shows no partiality for any of you. A sinner is a sinner is a sinner, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what. Why is he laboring this in his argument before he gets to the gospel? Well, he's taking us somewhere in this argument. Remember, I keep reminding us every week, he's taking us somewhere. You know, the only safety there is, the only refuge that exists for any of us is Jesus Christ. So, if you think about chapter 2, you might be tempted to think this, well, okay, so the Jew has a false sense of security. Why do we need to take time to really think hard about that today? Because I don't think any of us here are Jew. Ethnically or religiously, I don't think anyone comes to the journey that fits that bill. So why do we need to think about this? And why do we need to understand this part of the argument? It's because it has everything to do with us today. What he is teaching the Jew, the religious Jew in his day, is so relevant to the religious Christian now. We need to understand this argument so that we wouldn't create a refuge that doesn't exist. That we wouldn't try to think that something, that our confidence would be in our Christianity rather than Christ himself. We can be guilty of the exact same thing. So it's important to look at this argument, understand what it means and why it's there, and then apply it to our own hearts and minds and context right now so that we don't make the same mistake. So we're going to divide this text up into two sections. It's 17 through 29. So section 1 is about the law, 17 through 24. And then he's going to attack their circumcision, 25 through 29. So let's just look at 17 through 24. Paul says this: "But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in the darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." He's pretty aggressive here. I'm trying to read it as best I could imagine him meaning it. You know, Paul's like, you all are so proud of the law, aren't you? He's talking to the religious Jew here. You consider yourself a guide to the blind. You think of yourself as a light to those who are in the darkness, verse 19. You think of yourself as an instructor to the foolish, verse 20. A teacher of children. See what Paul's doing here? See what he's attacking? I tell you what he's not attacking. He's not attacking the law. Paul's not anti-law. He's not against the law of God, the Torah as they would think of it. As a matter of fact, you can read in his other letters, he explicitly says that the law is good, right? He's attacking the pride of the religious Jew. You then, who teach others, do you not teach yourself? In other words, yeah, you're privileged, you got the law, but are you guys actually doing all this stuff yourself? Or are you just proud to have the law in your hands? So other apostles teach this same truth too. And it's the one place I'm going to have us turn to. If you turn to the book of James, I just want to take you to James chapter 1 quickly, because James will make the same point about the law and people who think of it in the wrong terms, in the wrong ways. People who merely just hear the law but don't actually do what it says. So in James, where I conveniently had my ribbon waiting on me, James chapter 1, if you look at, I'm just going to read verses 22 through 24. And the reason I want to point this out is because when James makes this point in his epistle, he actually includes this neat little anecdotal illustration, and it clears up how we should and should not think about the law. Look at verse 22 through 24. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. The point that James is trying to make in that little illustration is this. If you're a hearer of the word and not a doer, it's like for you, the law is a mirror that you go up and you see yourself in, and then you walk away as if you never saw the problem in the mirror. You never actually saw anything about yourself of any substance that made a difference in how you lived. You just walked away and forgot what you even looked like. Anyone who looks in a mirror is going to see a blemish, no matter how beautiful you are. Right? You're going to see the blemish in the mirror. You look in the mirror, you see a problem in that mirror. And the law it's as if you just heard about the law or listen to what the law says and never actually change anything in your life, you're like a person who gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror, you see that your hair's sticking straight up, you need to brush your teeth, you need to get ready for work, but you just walk away and forget what you even saw, and you just go on with your day, as if you didn't see the problem in that mirror. That's what it's like if you only ever just hear the law or hear the word, but never actually do anything about it in your life. It's a convicting thing for all of us to think about this, because I think, at least to some degree, at some points in our lives and in some seasons, and maybe you're in that season right now, you hear this stuff, you hear this stuff, you hear this stuff, and it never changes anything in your life or the way you think or live. And that's what James is pointing out in his epistle, and it's what Paul is pointing out to the religious Jew here in Romans 2. He's saying, like, God didn't give us the law just so you can admire yourself, like looking in the mirror and admiring yourself. He gave you the law so you can change, so that you can see the imperfections and actually do something about it for once. So in Romans 2, he's going for the jugular here. You religious folks, you teach others. Do you not teach yourself? He's going at him hard. And let's just admit, this is convicting to us because it's so much easier to talk about this stuff than to actually do it. Let's just admit it. It's so much easier to talk about the changes we need to make in our life and hear about right and wrong than it is to actually do those things that we should do and not do those things that we shouldn't do in our life. I remember in high school baseball facing a pitcher who had been drafted. I was playing a team that actually two guys had been drafted to be in Major League Baseball. And the pitcher was one of them. He was drafted by the Kansas City Royals. And he threw in like the upper 80s, low 90s, which when you're in high school may as well have been 1,000,000 miles per hour. And I couldn't wait to face this guy because he's going to Major League Baseball. And so I get up there all excited to face this pitcher. And the first pitch, I swung as hard and as fast as I could, and it blew right past me. Strike one. And what do I hear from the stands? I hear my dad. Hey, you're a little behind there, buddy. Swing faster. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I'll swing faster. Good idea, Dad. So I get back in the batter's box, and I'm just ready to swing as hard and as fast as I can, and he blows it right past me, strike two. And I hear my dad again, Cody, you're late. Swing sooner. And at this point, I'm irritated. When you're swinging and missing and your dad's chirping at you like that, it's not helpful, guys. And then I get back in the batter's box, and if I'm going down, I'm going down swinging. I lived and died by that philosophy, and I died. Because he blew strike three right past me, and I swung, and at 3 pitches, I'm out of there. And as I came back towards the dugout, I was mad. I was in the moment. I threw my bat down, looked at my dad, and I was like, I know. You don't have to say it. I know. It's a lot easier to say those things than to actually do them in the game, right? And I'm so worried that sometimes when we're preaching about God's moral code, or we're talking about moral Christian values, and when we're reading about it in the text, and when I'm talking about it from up here, I'm so worried sometimes that you'll come in here and hear my preaching or hear this teaching like I was hearing my dad in that moment. Like, I can stand up here and say, love your enemies. Be more patient. Stop worrying so much. And what are you thinking when I say those things? I'm trying. It's really easy to say stop worrying and start praying more. It's really hard to actually do it. Stop lusting. Oh, that's easy to say, really hard to do. Hey, trust in God more. Okay, great idea. We all know these things, but knowing and doing them are two different things. And sometimes we can get so caught in a cycle of just hearing the things and not trying at all. That's why we need the gospel. Paul's confronting these Jews caught in a cycle of false security, and he's saying, you teach others, but have you taught yourself? You have the law, but are you actually doing it? You know it, you can teach it, you can talk about it, but obviously it's not fixing your sinful heart, is it? Because you still make mistakes. Right? When I talk about those things, loving your enemies and being more patient, like, you know you can't do those things perfectly. Isn't that so clear? Isn't that so obvious? Now, Paul, in the text I just read, he mentions 3 sins specifically, doesn't he? He says, you teach against stealing, you teach against adultery, you teach against robbing temples. Why does he choose those 3 to point out their flaws? Isn't that interesting? There's 613 laws that he could have pointed to. He chose stealing, he chose adultery, and he chose robbing temples. And I think that he chose those 3 because they're so common, and no one can even get past those 3 without being guilty. You take stealing, for example. Everybody in here is guilty of, have you ever stole something? Well, then you're a thief. You're guilty of stealing. And we've all done it at some season or point in our lives in some way. Just a few weeks ago, when the ladies had their pool party, I invited Brian and John over to the house and said, hey, bring the girls with you. And so we're just hanging out. We made pizza. And so I had little kids in my house. I had little Liza Wood there, and I had and Sophia. And so I'm not a girl dad. I just know how to play with little kids like they're little boys. And so I'm like, you guys want to play with lightsabers? Cool. So I got out all the old lightsabers that my boys are too old to play with now. And I put new batteries in them all. And I bet you for an hour and a half, we had a lightsaber fight in the basement. Just like, I was sweaty. I got sweaty. It was a workout. It was awesome. And at the end of that, those girls had so much fun. When it was time to go, Liza's like, these are mine now. Right. She's 2. She's like, yeah, I'm taking all of these home now. And John's like, no, that's stealing. You have to leave those here. But every 2-year-old's the same, right? Little thieves. Little thieves. We're all guilty of stealing at some point in time. Of course, it gets to adultery, and we remember Jesus' teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. If you even think about adultery, you're guilty of committing adultery. Well, that's that. Strike 2. But when it gets to robbing temples, you might think you're okay. You think, okay, stealing, yeah, Pastor, I'm guilty of that one at some point. There was that one time. You know, if I even think of a lustful thought, I'm guilty. Okay, you got me there. But robbing temples, at least I didn't rob a temple. At least I didn't break into a pagan temple and pillage the place and take all the gold. I'm not guilty of that one, see? But this is actually an Old Testament reference to Malachi. Here's a good homework text you could look up is Malachi chapter 3, 8 through 10. Malachi 3, 8 through 10. And in that moment, Malachi, the prophet of God, is really handing it to the people of God and saying, hey, when you don't give tithes and offerings to God, it's as good as robbing the temple. The temple. You are robbing God. And so that's the point Paul is likely going at here. Have you robbed God? Are you able to sit there and say you have always given enough to the church? Are you able to say that you've always given just the right amount or maybe even gone above and beyond when it comes to giving to the local church? I bet you none of us would be willing to say that. We're all guilty. How could we possibly give enough to the advancement of the gospel if we're believers? We're guilty of all three of these. Paul knows those religious Jews are guilty of all of those things too. They're the same people that are sinful, just like you and I. So all of those accusations would have stabbed them right in the heart, and then what he says in verse 24 would have been like the twist of the knife. For it is written, that means he's quoting something. For it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Ugh. Are you guilty of those sins? The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. This is another quote from the Old Testament from Isaiah chapter 52, verse 5, if you want to go look it up. But in other words, he's saying, you religious Jews, you can take a zoomed out view and look at the history of the Jews, and you know we're guilty of stealing. You know we're guilty of adultery. You know we're guilty of robbing God's temple. Even the best of us. Go to the best Jew you can find in the Old Testament. They're guilty, guilty, guilty. But you know, on an individual level, none of us get through those without being guilty. And because of you, the Gentiles blaspheme God. I think that's an incredibly convicting thing to consider for you and I. Remember, this is relevant to us today. We don't live up to it either. We are guilty also. And of course, when we fall short, it does reflect badly on the church. It seems nowadays, celebrity pastor falls into sin publicly about every, 6 months. It seems like, it's like a metronome. And our culture can't wait to make it headline news when a celebrity pastor fails, right? They get blasted. And I think the reason why non-believers can't wait to make that front page news is because it affirms what they want to believe, or rather, it affirms what they don't want to believe. They believe that all this is hogwash, and when they see someone fail in such a colossal way, it affirms that it is. I read a quote in one of my commentaries this week. I want to read it to you. It's actually from a Catholic priest named Brennan Manning. I don't know that I guess technically church fathers would have been Catholic. Okay, anyway. He says this, and I thought it was a good quote. The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him with their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. It's one thing, we expect the world to reject the gospel because the gospel itself is offensive, but isn't it an entire different thing when people reject the gospel because of one of us? Hits a little differently, doesn't it? Well, so if possessing the law is not enough, if teaching the law isn't enough, keeping the law isn't enough, what else would a religious Jew try to hide behind to find refuge from the wrath and judgment of God? Well, that would be their circumcision. So that's what Paul's going to go after next here in 25 through 29. Let me read it to you. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly. And circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. Now, it's really easy for you and I to read this and miss how outrageously offensive Paul is being to the religious Jew in his context. Like, this paragraph that I just read would have easily been the most offensive thing a religious Jew would have read up to this point in Romans. This would have been shocking for him to go after such a highly regarded ritual that is circumcision. And so right now, a Jew may have been tempted to say, like, okay, Paul, like, I know we're not perfect. It's easy to see God's people aren't perfect, but we're still circumcised. We're still the covenant people of God, so we're good. And there was a lot of rabbinical writings in the day outside of Scripture that were circulating amongst people that would have explicitly taught this. And I read several examples. One is this. Here's what a rabbi wrote in the first century to his followers. No circumcised man will see hell. Period. It doesn't get any clearer than that. They would explicitly teach, you're circumcised, you're good. You're in. And Paul here is explicitly rejecting that specific teaching. The covenant sign of circumcision without perfect obedience of the law, it's just an empty symbol. It's the same as like my wedding ring, right? This wedding ring is a symbol of a promise that I made, but obviously if I abandon my wife, this ring doesn't mean anything. It's just a symbol. So your baptism, it's a beautiful thing. We're going to take communion here in a little bit. It's a beautiful thing. They're wonderful things. Your church membership, a wonderful thing. But they're signs pointing to something inward. Right? The signs themselves, they can't create this spiritual reality that they symbolize. And that's the point that Paul's trying to make to the Jews about their circumcision. And the way that he says it would have caused their jaws to hit the floor. Because he talks about judgment. Did you catch the image, the scenario that he created in that paragraph? Right? If you have this righteous, uncircumcised Gentile, if this Gentile was uncircumcised, but yet he did everything right the way you're supposed to, don't you understand, religious Jew, that he would have the right to stand in judgment over you who are circumcised, but don't actually do what the law says to do? So your circumcision is meaningless. Their uncircumcision is as good as circumcision because they do what's right. But your circumcision is as good as uncircumcision because you do what's wrong. It's a hypothetical to make the point. There is no Gentile out there that's living up to the law perfectly who's uncircumcised. That doesn't exist. But he's making this point, hypothetical point, to point out to the religious Jew their hypocrisy. If you're circumcised and you claim that you have the law and you claim that you're God's people, but you don't actually do everything right, what makes you think God's wrath and judgment won't come down on you? Those are just symbols. Those are just signs. He's pointing out the inconsistency of their logic so that they'll wake up, right? So they'll wake up. When it comes to the wrath and judgment of God, this is an issue, this is about matters of obedience, not your circumcision. Are you living up to the law perfectly? If not, you got a problem. And so he talks about their faith, their religion, in a series of contrasts there in 28 and 29. It's not about what's going on outwardly. Rather, it's about what's going on inwardly. It's not about the flesh. Rather, it's a matter of the heart, Paul says. It's not about the letter of the law. Rather, it's about the Spirit inside of you, the Spirit of God. It's not about the praise of men. It's about the praise of God. This is an interesting couple of verses up to this point. He's been talking about wrath. He's been talking about judgment. And now suddenly he's talking about this work of God. He's hinting. We're getting our first clue, our first glance at this gospel that he's going to elaborate upon as we go deeper into the book of Romans. It's about, salvation's about a work of the Spirit in our hearts. It's not about living up to the law perfectly. You can't do it. It's not about your circumcision. It's about God. He's taking us through he's laboring these points to take us to this bigger hope that there is salvation apart from the law. So he's really hammering these points to the religious Jew to say, what makes someone actually a redeemed human being, a redeemed person before God? What actually saves us from the wrath and judgment of God? What actually makes us justified before him? Well, it's not your heritage, it's not your rituals, it's not your religious ceremony, it's not your circumcision. It's something happening inwardly by the Spirit. He's preparing his readers, all of them from the pagan to the religious Jew, to stand before God and have an actual refuge that makes a difference. And the same thing is being presented to us. When you stand before God one day, what will you hide in? Where is your refuge? How will you present your case? Are you planning on pointing to your baptism and your track record to convince God you're perfectly holy like him? I hope not. I hope not. We should find the one refuge that's left, and that is Jesus. And so as we take communion, we remember this is it. This is the only refuge that there is. We take the bread to remember his life. He did live up to the law. He did what you couldn't do, what you can't do no matter how hard you try. You know that you can't live up to it. You haven't lived up to it. You're not living up to it, and you won't live up to it. You hold the bread, that sign of his righteousness, and we put faith in his righteousness, the works of Christ alone, and through faith, that righteousness is imputed to us. And when we stand before God, we're standing there with the credentials of Jesus himself through this faith that we have in him. We take the juice to remember the atonement on the cross. I don't work off my sin. I'm not trying to convince God I tipped the scales in my favor. I did more good than I did bad. That's not salvation. There is no salvation there. We point to the works of Christ alone. The blood shed on the cross atoned for all of my sins, past, present, and future. This is the refuge of the Christian faith when we think about wrath and judgment. Let's pray, and we'll remember together in a time of communion. Lord, we thank you for the book of Romans and a time to think about what it's teaching us. We want to think about salvation rightly. It's so tempting, Lord, to convince ourselves or to trick ourselves into a false sense of security based on some good moment we had in our life when we were obedient, when we were having a good day, when things didn't look bad in our lives. And we think somehow that would make us perfectly righteous before you. We're so thankful for your word that points out how flawed that way of thinking truly is. There is no refuge apart from you. And you have so graciously sent your Son to live and to die for us and to advocate for us right now. So Lord, as we hold this communion in our hands and take the sign of this covenant that we have with you, I pray that it would truly mean something, that we truly can find our confidence in what you alone have done, and that we can rest in that today, that our confidence of our salvation is built upon completely what you have done from start to finish. Help us to think about this in a way that would change how we think and live and result in repentance, in a life that isn't just hearing this stuff, but it's actually going out to the world and doing it as well. Lord, bless us in this time of worship. In Jesus' name we pray.